contract, Chair.
When you, sorry for repeating one or two of the questions. When you are in a meeting, are you ahead of the executive support? What is your position?
Yes, I'm the head of the executive support function, Chair, correct?
When you go to the board, am I correct to say if you are called to present in a manner that affects a particular decision, you are supposed to go back to your unit knowing what the position of the board is?
Chair, if I understand correct, I present to the board for consideration, and once there is a conclusion on instruction, I then action that through our department. That's correct.
Now, there is this decision of the contract of the CEO. If I'm correct, you left the meeting before you knew the decision, am I right? The meeting which was chaired by Klein?
Chair, are you referring to the meeting of the 21st of November, the last one?
That you gave to Ngubano, was it about the contract or remuneration?
No, when it was a contract issue we discussed, I attended the whole meeting, and then the contract was given through to the chairperson for consideration.
Am I correct that you said you were given the final position after the meeting? You left the meeting.
Chair, I left the meeting on the 21st. If we're referring to that one, that's correct.
You say you were advised that this was finalized.
My understanding was that I must finalize the letter, which I've done, Chair.
Say you were advised that it was finalized, the whole issue of the CEO by the board meeting.
I don't know if the whole issue was finalized, but the letter was finalized. I had the impression that the letter was finalized.
About what?
About Mr. Molefi's early retirement, Chair.
By the meeting where you were sitting.
At the meeting that I was called in, Chair.
Was it a written note?
No, it was verbally communicated to me, and obviously was supposed to be reflected, I think, in the minutes of the meeting.
Who communicated it?
At the meeting, the chairperson of the People and Governance Committee.
Thanks. Now, there is one or two contradictions I want you to clarify for me. For instance, you are saying Mr. Molefi says, let me just come quick to this. You are saying in November 9, the chair informed you that the minister instructed the board that contract must be on 5 years. That's the 9th of November, 2015. Am I correct?
That is correct, Chair.
Yes. This was discussed with the company secretary, and again, 9 November, a letter based on fixed term was given to the company secretary. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
Now let's go to 11 November. Molefi signed an appointment letter. The letter did not state the term. Is there no contradiction there?
No, there is no contradiction. The letter of appointment stated that he will be requested to enter into a term, but a physical term wasn't stipulated in that letter of appointment.
If on the 9th of November, the minister had advised that it be 5-year term and discussed with the company secretary, who as a result draft a letter of appointment, is there no contradiction between what happens on the 11th and what happened on the 9th?
Chair, I'm not totally too sure if there was still a discussion to find out about the whole term, if we have to go do it or not.
Don't you see any contradiction?
No, I think it was stipulated in the letter that he will be requested to enter into a term, but finalizing the term, I think, came once the contract was finalized. So I think he was already made aware that he will be requested to enter into a term.
Where was that put? Which letter?
In his letter of appointment, Chair.
Are you referring to the same letter of November?
Of November, Chair.
But this letter says the letter did not state the term, specific term.
Yes, it merely stated that there will be a term, but a physical term wasn't stated.
Be a term.
It merely stated there will be a term, Chair.
I'll just be short. Let's come to, did I hear you saying that by the 9th February, around the 9th February 2016, there was no contract yet in place?
That is correct, Chair.
Brian's submission here, maybe you can clarify that. Brian says, in October, I received and signed the executive employment contract from Eskom, which specified commencement date as the 1st October. The contract specified the employment. This is October 2015.
Chairperson, I assume that was the open-ended contract. It was discussed with him. I never received a copy of that signed contract.
But if you say by the 9th of February there was no contract in place yet, where do you get that?
Chairperson, I think in the beginning when the letter of when Mr. Molefe was appointed, the total permanent employment contract was discussed with him, and I think it was shared with him as well. And then subsequent to this, the minister then mentioned the 5-year term that you want to implement into the contract. So we...
No, Mr. Minar, just, this is the last question I'm dealing with, and I don't want, I'm requesting you not to do unnecessary elaboration. I'm saying you say you have repeated that. You say around 9th February 2016, there was no contract in place. Molefe says in October, he received and signed, I'm not interested whether it's a 5-year term. He received and signed a contract. Can you explain that contradiction?
I don't have a copy of that contract, Chair.
So who could be staying away from the truth here? Is either you or Molefe?
That is true, Chair, but I don't have a copy on the record.
No, who could be staying away from the truth? Is it you or Molefe? Because you are saying two different things, concretely differently. So what I'm saying, which truth are we supposed to take? Because remember, you are an exclusive executive support function. And you are saying, in your capacity in the execution of that, around this February, there was no contract. Molefe says, I signed it in October 2015. So the two necessarily are not the same. All I want to know from you, what must we believe between the two? You are an executive support.
Chairperson, the judgment is for this committee. I can't judge. All I want to let you know that I do not...
I want to... No, you are... Remember, you've got a senior responsibility. You've got to tell us what we must believe. You've got a duty, you are paid for it. You say 9 February, no contract. Molefe says October. In the execution of your job, where you should live with the consequences of what you say, what position must we take between the two?
The only evidence I've got is a contract that is signed that I've got on record. I do not have any other record.
No, Mr. Munar. I'm saying there are two positions. Close this. I want to know between these two positions, yours and Molefe, which one must we take? You've got a duty and you are paid for it. Executive functions. Actually, fiduciary and more responsible in the principles of good faith in terms of Section 2 of the Labor Relations Act. You are here in that capacity, and you said by February there was no contract. Molefe says, I signed a contract. I want you to tell the committee, according to you in the execution of your work, when did Molefe have a contract?
Chairperson, let me just get a date where it was, and that's the only contract that I've got, and this is my case that I'm standing with.
When is that?
Just give me some time. They can just go through this again, please. Chair, sorry, I have to go through it now. I just got to find out when the date was when the contract was signed.
You confidently said, when I asked you repeatedly, you said there was no contract around the 9th of February 2016. And I asked you more than twice, more than thrice. You said there was no contract, and I kept on repeating to you that you differ concretely with Molefe in material terms. I'm not sure what are you looking for.
Chair, give me. I'll just give you now. As I mentioned, 7 March, the contract was drafted earlier, awaiting feedback from a minister, only signed in March 2016. That's the only contract I've got in file, and that's the only contract that is signed by Mr. Molefe and by the chairperson of the board.
So you don't know the October?
I do not, Chair.
You don't know?
I do not have anything on record for that, Chair.
Thanks.
I don't.
Thanks.
Honorable Mazon. Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Minnaar, on the 21st of November 2016, you state that after the committee discussed the early retirement, I was requested by the chairperson of P&GC to finalise the letter and give it to the chairperson. When you did this advice, did you also advise Eskom regarding the cost to Eskom of pension buy-ins and buybacks of time?
Chairperson, that is correct. It was mentioned to the People and Governance Committee what the amount was. The amount at that stage we received was 25 million. That wasn't a final amount because there came some changes, I think, as the committee knew. And that wasn't totally, when the number of 31 million came out, wasn't totally too sure where it's come from. But the committee was aware of the 25 million. I shared it directly with the chairperson of the People and Governance Committee.
Okay, so 31 million comes out as a rough amount, and you yourself are not too sure where this money comes from. Did you not have an ethical duty to inform the Eskom board that this could be problematic?
Chairperson, the calculation we're not totally, so we get an estimate from the fund. And the estimate from the fund was the 25 million we received. And this is it, and that's the last number I knew of. So on Mr. Molefe's retirement, that calculated because he got married in the meantime, and that changed that number. I wasn't aware of it, and I could unfortunately not also advise the fund of the change in the number, the board.
Now, you know that Eskom is in a precarious financial situation. So an amount of 25 million that then goes up to 31 million obviously has a massive effect on the company and on the finances. At any stage, was this enormous amount of money discussed, and perhaps the reputational damage it could do Eskom, and perhaps why such allowances were being made for an individual or being made by a company that was teetering on a very bad financial situation?
Chair, the 25 million was discussed at the committee. It was shared with the committee. As I mentioned, unfortunately, the 30 million was after the fact. We only found out once it was in the newspapers because we don't follow up on the numbers again after it's been submitted to the fund.
Mr. Minnaar, it sounds to me like we have a problem here because a lot of things weren't followed up, and there's certainly a lot of information that you weren't privy to. And I say this because on your timeline, on the 20th of April, you say, I was requested after the meeting with the minister to determine if the monies paid to the EPPF can be paid back to Eskom. Should this be possible, the intent was to start negotiations with Mr. Molefe on possible scenarios, i.e. return to Eskom, resign, or take the issue to court. Now, why would the minister have such a bipolar legal opinion and a bipolar approach to this payout than you and the Eskom board had?
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I cannot answer that. And I also want to mention that that's my opinion as well. The minister was very clear that I know that she was uncomfortable paying the 30 million out. So the only outcome was obviously the 3 issues that I mentioned. You either come back, pay back the money, or it has to be a court issue. So I wasn't involved in further discussions around it. So unfortunately, I cannot answer that for you directly.
Chair, I'm concerned by the last couple of paragraphs of your information to us. You say, on the Minister's decision not to agree to the retirement issue, Eskom found itself in a difficult position. I agree with you. The option was to convince Mr. Molefe to return to Eskom. Full stop. In doing this, the Eskom had to show that the retirement issue was a mistake or wrongly interpreted. Now, as a layman, and certainly not as someone that works at Eskom, that line, in doing this, Eskom had to show that the retirement issue was a mistake or wrongly interpreted. That means to me Eskom had to massage the truth. Can I have your opinion on that?
No, Chair, and I think as I mentioned earlier, remember those are my views and my thinking about it as well. If you ask me honestly, as I sit here, is Mr. Molefe retired? I said we followed the processes. He did retire. It was a decision made, the resolution was made, the pension fund said he can. My understanding of permanent employment is, so if you really ask me, honestly without anything, is Mr. Molefe retired? I said yes. Now, I think the other issues, as soon as something comes out, a company obviously have to say how they're going to deal with this going forward. And merely, as my view state there, is that obviously there have to be then discussions on how they're going to process this going forward. So I open myself, obviously, by stating my personal views over there, but I hope, honestly, I can provide the answer for you and that it is satisfactory. It's not an Eskom view necessary, that would be my view.
You say in the next paragraph, I have dealt with this option before in 4 cases, and it was very clear on the conditions, i.e. age 50 and 10 years service. Can you tell us a little bit about what other 4 cases you dealt with?
Chairperson, we've had in Eskom previously separate from individuals, and I think this is so important. I think all companies have to have processes in place if you separate or let go with people at a stage. The thing the way we've done it is with people that maybe with 20-odd years service, and the people, the board consider those things for early retirement. They either may approve additional years service or they may approve waiver the penalties. And then there was also cases where they want to keep people where individuals requested for those benefits and it wasn't granted. But the provision resides with the pension fund that we can do it if we want to do it. And the cases we've dealt with was where people had in excess of 10 years service, 20 years or whatever the case may be.
Okay, so certainly not in a case like Mr. Molefe where he had way below that criteria. Okay, so we're all in agreement that he did not meet that criteria. Then on the 27th of June, this strikes me as important, Chair. I was also requested to look at the CFO contract on how we could possibly improve it. Now, it seems to me an overly kind gesture on your behalf, Mr. Minai, and quite frankly on behalf of Eskom, that certainly, you know, I wish my employee would look at ways to improve my contract. Because definitely an out-of-the-way formulation was done to improve the contract of the CFO, who I assume was Mr. Anoj Singh, and certainly an out-of-the-way approval went for Mr. Molefe. Can you possibly explain why the Eskom board was so adamant at improving both of these 2 gentlemen's contracts?
Chair, I think and this is my view again, I think it is very, very important that we were faced with a term contract for the first time in executive employment in Eskom. I think as a committee knows, it's not a best practice. We open ourselves to major things if you enforce term contracts. And for what it's worth, I'll also stand for it. You manage performance through a short-term incentive scheme. I'm going to come to your answer if you allow me. Through an short-term incentive scheme. So you don't need to have a 5-year contract to get a person out of the organization. If a person doesn't perform on a 12-month basis, you can get processes in place to get him out of the organization. So it was a huge thing imposed on us by bringing a 5-year term contract in place. Hence our interpretation of permanent employment with a term. And the question around the issue is how do we look at this individual with being the issue that retirement has been taken away from them, ability to retire at normal age 65 or 63. What can we do for improvements? And then the clear thing was, in the case of Mr. Molefe, because he's 50 and the pension fund said we can purchase that additional years, we could address his issue. But in the case of Mr. Singh, he was younger at that age when he would retire. That wouldn't work for him. So there was nothing we can do for him. And I think the whole thing, as you raised, the thing that started looking at these issues was the thing that this 5 years was forced or was requested on Eskom to do.
Now, I do also find it strange that we've gone now from a permanent contract to a permanent contract for a fixed term. And I've read up on a little bit of labour law, and I've consulted a few of my colleagues who are labour law specialists. And they would agree that you're quite right. It's certainly not best practice at all to enter into a fixed-term contract because, legally speaking, labour law doesn't recognise a fixed-term contract as being permanent employing. So I'm afraid I disagree with you when you say that someone is permanently employed on a fixed-term contract. You cannot legally be permanently employed on a fixed-term contract. So I would put it to you that, in fact, you've been misled by whoever advised you legally, because certainly the reason people are put on fixed-term contracts is so that the company does not have to afford them benefits, such as pension payouts, such as medical payouts. And in actual fact, in this country, fixed-term contracts are very frowned upon because it's seen as exploitation of the worker. And I see you nodding and agreeing with me, so we're clearly on the same page here. So would you agree with me that it's virtually a legal impossibility to be permanently employed on a fixed-term contract?
Chair, through you, I don't know, and I think that's why it's so important to get that opinion finally on the employment with Eskom, because that has to pass the way for us going forward as well. We obviously have to look at these things totally different going forward. But I agree with you on the whole issue that from a best practice point of view, we were put into a different situation, and where we are now should definitely look differently at it, because as I mentioned to you, that these benefits had to then be funded out of the total package of the individual, which in our case was merely proposing a recommended salary for Mr. Molefe that was the same what he received in Transnet, and also the benefits in there.
Chair, then my very last question. Mr. Minnaar, since being informed that you were going to appear here today, have you had meetings with Eskom board members or any legal representation of Eskom where you were trained in terms of how to answer questions regarding your timeline?
Not at all, Chair. I do, however, have meetings with the board members, but that's on operational issues. I haven't been trained at all. These are my record of events.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mazon. Honorable Loyenge.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Minnaar, normatively, you are employed to render executive services at Eskom, dealing exclusively with the executives. Am I correct?
You are correct, Chair.
What are your major qualifications that put you to that level?
I'm a graduate, postgraduate, but I think my exposure in the environment is maybe which assisted me in the remuneration and benefits environment over the past 17 odd years.
Who deals with quality assurance at Eskom?
We do have a quality assurance department, Chair, but not specifically within our environment.
Within your environment?
In my environment, we just get audited. I don't have a quality assurance. What we do, however, is obviously information we provide is based on benchmark information and certain external companies that assist us with it.
What made you not to advise the board and the executive at Eskom that you were not very comfortable with the manner in which Eskom has been having acting boards, acting CEOs, all those aspects were actually part of your duties to exercise?
Chairperson, I don't want to run away from any duties. I think, as I mentioned, I've been 28 years in this company, which is an awesome organization. What we've seen over the last 10 years was obviously a fluctuation of chief executives coming in and out, some a few months. Eskom even had 20 days without a chief executive. Now, I think from a caring employee, and I think all employees will tend to raise this issue, I got a benefit that I do have access to the chairperson. And kindly enough, he will listen to me as well. But I don't think we can do too much as an organization in addressing those issues. I sometimes think these things are not maybe totally in our control on the appointment of bringing people in.
On the appointment, particularly of Mr. Brian Molefe, did you share your sentiments to either the board or the executive, including the minister, in relation to whether the term should be fixed or a permanent contract will be viable for him as it pertains to the existing environment at Eskom?
Yes, Chair. I think I was very clear from the beginning that I'm totally against term contracts. You expose the organization, and I don't think we would have had a Mr. Molefe discussion today if it wasn't for a term. It's not a best practice, as the Honourable Member has mentioned as well, and there is major risk, as I mentioned, SA in 2001. I mean, that was phenomenal amounts that get paid out. So you really do expose the organization by enforcing term contracts, and I did advise the chairperson of the board, chairperson of the People and Governance Committee, that I'm uncomfortable. I'm quite outspoken about that.
Did Mr. Molefe resign or applied for early retirement?
He applied for the retirement.
When did you realize that?
When the request was given to me, at the specific date I don't know, and when I was requested to do the letter for the committee meeting on the 21st of November, that came clear out. The chairperson did share the letter to me, Mr. Molefe's intent to retire. I've got that on file.
How much money from the pension fund do you know of that Mr. Molefe already benefited?
Chairperson, I'm under correction for this. It will be dangerous for me to mention numbers. It is important to note that Mr. Molefe brought in excess of 4 million over from his Transnet fund to the Eskom Pension and Provident Fund. The third that was calculated obviously would include some of that money, but I haven't got the numbers in front of me. I can try and get it for the committee if they want. We, however, stopped these retirement, not we, the pension fund stopped this retirement payment, as far as I know, until the outcome of the court.
Did Mr. Molefe qualify for any pension benefits?
For Eskom, accordingly to the resolution, I say yes.
What if Mr. Molefe tells you now that he understands fully the fact that he was not even supposed to have received that money from the pension fund because he did not have the 10 years service at Eskom, and at the same time he did not get into 60 years?
Chair, as I mentioned, the resolution that was passed by the board and also on the information we received from Eskom Pension Fund, my view is that Mr. Molefe retired. I know there's different opinions about it, but that's my opinion.
My last question. Can you proudly pronounce yourself as an executive services provider as Eskom, and you have actually achieved your goals, and you did not provide the ideal mediocritical service at Eskom?
Chairperson, it's not here to boast about yourself, but I think I don't reflect about me. I reflect about a department, which I always say you're only as good as your last record. I think we've run a very professional service over the 17 years that we've done. We made sure that everything is validated by information we receive from sources, and whatever we present to the committee is obviously for their consideration. don't do any decisions on it. We merely implement. And I do believe that everything we've done as per audits has done above record, and all documentations can, I think, vouch for that as well.
But is it deliberate on your part that you are not giving straightforward answers to very clear questions here when you were appointed to provide special services to Eskom and also guide the processes professionally that will take Eskom to where she belongs?
I do believe I do provide the services, Chair.
Letters were written, contracts were submitted without timelines. Contracts that were for Mr. Mulife were not very clear, and Mr. Mulife can attest to this situation that says.
All right, we're monitoring that Eskom inquiry by Parliament's Public Enterprises Committee.